That sound. If you bowl, you know exactly what I'm talking about. For around 40 years, one company has been obsessed with making that happen more often. A company that, once an underdog, so behind that they almost didn't live their first year, took over the bowling industry. This is the true story of Storm, the bowlers company. Bowling is really, really old. We're talking ancient Egypt old. Polynesians had their own versions, Europeans had theirs. Seems like humans everywhere just figured out that rolling something at other things and knocking them down is just satisfying. The version closest to what we know came over with the Dutch and German immigrants in the 1800s. They'd set up 9 pins in taverns and saloons, and people loved it. Maybe loved it a bit too much. Gambling surrounding it got so serious that several United States states actually banned it. This was mainly due to the gambling and crime surrounding it. After all, it was just a game, right? Well, the response was pretty clever. Add another pin, rearrange them, and call it a different game. But what was once a simple loophole would quickly grow into something much, much larger. After the end of World War II came the boom of bowling. Automatic pin setters made it much more efficient to run, the suburbs were spreading out, and by the 60s, there were 12,000 bowling alleys in America. And by this point, it was by far the most played sport in America. The PBA was founded in 1958, and suddenly bowling had a platform. Bowling was on TV every Saturday, with Earl Anthony becoming a household name. These guys were athletes, and millions of people watched them compete. But if you look at the bowling balls themselves, they were pretty boring. Hard rubber gave way to polyester in the 70s, which was an improvement, but they mostly went straight. You could hook them if you really know what you were doing, but for most people, it was just throw and pray. At this point, the big companies had their process down and weren't really innovating because they didn't have to. Bowling at the time was huge, so if it ain't broke, don't fix it. That was the world in 1985. Bowling was popular, equipment was stagnant, and nobody was really asking for anything too much different. But all that changed with a bucket of KFC chicken and a dream. Brigham City, Utah, about an hour north of Salt Lake City. It's known for peaches and not much else. This is where Bill Chrisman ran an industrial supply and chemical business called CC Distributing. In the 80s, everyone was cleaning their urethane bowling balls with dishwashing detergent, throwing them in dishwashers, scrubbing them in sinks, anything to keep the reaction consistent and get the oil out. Bill saw an opportunity to make a cleaner you could just spray on with a towel, right there at the lanes. Then came a call that changed everything. A distributor wanted 50 dozen bottles, but there was just one problem. Bill didn't have those 50 dozen bottles, so logically, as anyone with no money and a dream, he pulled all his kids out of school to help bottle the ball cleaner. Success with the cleaner attracted attention, and Keith Orton, who had worked in the industry, and he approached Bill with a wild idea. What if they didn't just make cleaner? What if they also made bowling balls? Of course, at the time, Bill didn't really know how to make bowling balls or if it would even work, but he talked one person into loaning him $25,000, which was just enough to buy a lathe and some sample materials. The first Storm bowling balls were poured out of KFC buckets. Bill and Keith went to KFC for lunch one day, bought some empty buckets, and went back to the shop. They mixed the 2-part resin solution with paint sticks and poured it into mold around weight blocks. They had done all of this by hand, with all of the air bubbles and imperfections that came with it. But at least they had a product. It gave them an idea of what they had. Originally, they had just made black, solid urethane balls under the name High Score Products, the same brand that he had made his bowling ball cleaner, which was named You Clean, You Score. They were just HSP for short. Nothing fancy, just solid, basic equipment. But they needed a name for the ball itself. One night at a Mexican restaurant, when trying to figure out what to call it, Bill's wife said one word: Storm. Everyone stopped, and there it was. They named the bowling ball just that, Storm. The next ball was a storm, and the next one. And pretty much, with the naming convention that they had soon come up with, everyone just started calling the company Storm. However, in 1994, a company in New Jersey, also called High Score Products, sued them for trademark infringement. By then, everyone had called High Score Products Storm anyway, So they just dropped the high score products and entirely became Storm. The early days were brutal. Bill and his partner lived on the verge of personal bankruptcy constantly. There was never enough money. One day, there was literally nothing in the bank account because Bill had taken it all out to keep Storm afloat. And that's when Bill's partner gave him an ultimatum. Either Storm succeeds now, or they give it all up and pull the plug. Then, Bill watched a tournament on TV. Tony Westlake was using a reactive resin ball made by Keith's old company, Excalibur, and it hooked unlike anything else on the market. Bill turned to Keith and said that they needed to sample that urethane. Turns out, Keith had actually worked with the same materials when he was at Faball, but they had told him to stop using it. Storm had nothing to lose, so they got samples from the same distributor, poured some test balls, and created what they called the Teal Storm. There was no other reactive ball like it on the market, and Mullers couldn't believe the energy it had in the back end. The ball just exploded through the pins. Without that ball, Storm wouldn't have even made it till summer, but that ball had changed everything. Suddenly, Storm was in the game, and for the first time, they were competing. Their success brought them a choice. Did they want to stay small and safe, or get big and compete with the major companies? As with most entrepreneurs, Bill and Keith weren't content with staying small. They quickly set the goal to create 100 bowling balls a day, and to do that, they needed distributors, the best bowlers, and some credibility. In the fall of 1996, Storm's tour rep called them with news. He had given Pete Weber some free bowling balls to try out, and Pete had bowled really well with them, and he wanted to talk about signing a contract. But there was a problem. Pete Weber at the time had a really bad reputation. Pete was controversial and unpredictable, with some other companies already having dropped him. Bill wasn't even sure if Pete genuinely wanted to sign with Storm, or if he just needed a platform of any kind. Bill decided it was worth the risk, and in 1997, Pete Weber officially signed with Storm. He's been with them ever since, nearly 30 years. In that 1997 season, Pete would make 10 telecasts, far exceeding their expectations, and Storm's exposure just went straight through the roof. His personality, for better or worse, kept Storm in the conversation. He was huge for the company then, and has remained instrumental ever since. But what made Storm really special wasn't just the celebrity that they had on their hands. Storm's technology evolved faster than most their competitors could keep up with through new weight block designs and better cover stock formulas. They had somewhere to start with Keith's early work, getting those first weight blocks right, getting the resin dialed in, but where they ended up was way beyond what everyone expected. They got deep into the science of how core shapes influence roll patterns and how cover stock determines interaction with oil. If you get both things right for the correct conditions, bowlers can do things they've never been able to do before. Looking back on the past, Bill said, "Storm classed up the world of bowling, and I'll take full credit for that. I think the key was we were too stupid to know we couldn't do it." Today, Storm has won more tournaments in the past couple decades than any other company. Not because of luck or marketing, but because they made bowling balls that helped good players win. But now we need to talk about the elephant in the room, because Storm, as we know today, is not just one company. We need to talk about Roto, which started all the way back in 1955, way before Storm existed. An old-school company with a solid reputation. For years, Roto was just another mid-tier brand with decent equipment, but nothing really spectacular. But in the 90s, something changed. They started taking risks, getting creative with designs, and building balls with personality. Roto balls have always had an attitude, with aggressive cores and strong cover stocks. They weren't trying to be everything to anyone. They were building equipment for bowlers who wanted to hook the lane, and the power players loved them for it. Where Storm at the time was known for being versatile, consistent equipment, Roto was the choice for bowlers who wanted something aggressive with an edge. In 2006, Storm acquired Roto, and at first, people wondered if Storm would just absorb them and turn Roto into just another Storm. They didn't. Storm kept Roto independent with separate design teams and different approaches to ball development. If you loved Rotogrip's aggressive style, nothing changed. But if you preferred Storm's approach, nothing changed there either. What did change, however, was the combination. Storm now had these two powerful brands under one roof with different personality, different fans, and double the presence on the tour. The acquisition made Storm stronger without killing what made Rotogrip special. But now we need to talk about the other one, because it isn't just two either. 900 Global's story starts in Texas, with former executives from Track and Columbia 300. 900 Global launched in the late 2000s and came in hot. Their bowls weren't subtle. These were pieces designed for bowlers who knew exactly what they wanted. They grew fast, not to Storm or Rotogrip level, but they built a dedicated following of bowlers who were passionate about the brand's willingness to push boundaries. Storm was watching. They'd successfully kept Rotogrip's identity intact after that acquisition. They had also proven that they could manage multiple brands with that. And in 2014, Storm acquired 900 Global with the exact same playbook they used on Rotogrip. They kept them independent, let them do their own thing, but gave them Storm's resources and distribution network. In time, 900 Global kept making aggressive, boundary-pushing equipment, and their Zen series became one of the most popular symmetrical lines in the sport. The acquisition gave them stability and reach without changing their core DNA. By this point, Storm has three distinct brands: Storm for versatility and consistency, Rotogrip for power and aggression, and 900 Global for the top-of-the-line symmetrical designs. They were three personalities, all serving different types of bowlers. By the 2010s, the bowling ball market had gotten crowded with new companies every year. The established brands were releasing 10, 15, maybe even 20 balls annually across all of them. Walking into a pro shop as a new bowler must have been extremely overwhelming. Everyone claimed to have the most hook, the strongest backhand, and the most versatile cover stock. The marketing got loud, the release cycles got faster, and companies started throwing everything at the wall to see what stuck. Storm, however, took a different path. They weren't going to release a new ball every 3 weeks just to have something to fill a gap. Each release had to serve a purpose, solve a specific problem, and fill a real gap in their lineup instead of one that they had just created by discontinuing something before. A problem that you might see today. This approach created something interesting: longevity. The High Road, released in 2008, remained one of the most popular balls in the sport until its end of production in 2024. Most balls get replaced by the next year's model and forgotten, but Storm's best designs have stuck around because they actually work. Just look at the Phase 2. Storm's facility today looks more like a laboratory than it does a factory. But to make things even better, they've got bowling lanes right there in the building, because all the computer modeling in the world just can't replace the human feeling. You need people throwing bowling balls, feeling how they react, and seeing how they respond to different releases and lane conditions. Technology today has gotten so wild to the point where the ball motion today is nearly unrecognizable from 30 years ago. And the oil patterns got more complex too. House shots are one thing, but sport patterns are tough, with less ratio, differing lengths, and less predictability. You can't just throw it the same way between patterns and expect it to work. You need equipment designed for those conditions. And that's where Storm came in. But bowling's got something that most sports don't. Everyone plays on the same field. Those lanes where your Tuesday night leagues are bowled are the same dimensions as the US Open. So you're facing the same challenges as the pros, just a much friendlier version of it. When a league bowler buys a High Road or a Phase 2, for example, they're using the exact same ball as the pros have used. Not a knockoff or a cheap version, the same bowling ball. Storm worked themselves into that culture early with community engagement, and even today, they post nearly every honor score on their platforms if the bowler has used their equipment, celebrating the league bowler like a PBA champion. Looking ahead to the future, here's the reality. There are fewer bowling centers now than in the 60s, and that's just true. But the bowlers who are in it are more serious and invested than before. The new generation is coming up strong. Watch a youth tournament. You'll see kids throwing equipment far better than many adults. Two-handed bowling has opened up the sport to people who couldn't generate the revs the traditional way, and the talent level across the board is much higher than it's ever been. If you're bad at one-handed, just switch to two-handed. And if you're bad at two-handed, just switch to one-handed. Find something that works. Storm's investment here through youth programs and supporting collegiate bowlers is all about thinking long-term, and where the sport goes rather than the next quarter's sales. Furthermore, their innovation hasn't stopped. New materials are being tested, core designs being more complex, and the goal is still the same as it was in 1985. Help bowlers perform better, score higher, and have more fun. From KFC buckets to a Utah warehouse to the most dominant name in bowling equipment with 3 different brands, each with its own identity and history, thousands of tournament wins between them, and millions of bowlers worldwide, Bill Chrisman says, if you look back at everything Storm has ever done, the key was being too stupid to know that you couldn't do it. Risk, dedication, and never saying no. Building something from nothing. But it all comes back to this. One bowler, one shot, in the moment when everything comes together. Now this video wasn't meant to be a Storm glazing session, but as I dug into the company's history, I kept finding these incredible stories. The chicken bucket, the empty bank accounts, the gamble with Pete Weber. As you may or may not know by now, I started paying attention to the PBA right as Storm was beginning to completely dominate every facet of bowling in the 2010s. While the big brands like Brunswick and Hammer may have been just as established at the time, Storm was known far more in my local scene. But with the rise of two-handers and two-handers on the tour, they are just too big to ignore. For the next video, I'll try to find some more interesting topics and stories to share. Interview some staffers or some execs if they seem interested. But with that being said, that's about all I've got time for today, so leave a like and subscribe if you'd like to see more. We're pretty close to 10k, and at 10k, I'm gonna be releasing some custom chamois, which I'll showcase when I get a little closer. But that's all I've got time for today, so see you guys next time.